The evening was quiet, yet heavy, like the air carried a story no one had dared to tell. Sandra Bullock sat across from Keanu Reeves in a small, warmly lit room. The room was filled with soft golden light from a single lamp, casting gentle shadows on the wooden table between them. Outside, the world seemed far away, but inside, a silence lingered that was stronger than words. It was not just silence. It was the weight of memory. Keanu's eyes looked distant, almost lost in a place that was not present. Sandra noticed it, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hand rested on the table but never moved. She knew this was not ordinary silence. This was the kind of silence that came before a storm of truth. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft but steady. "Keanu," she said, "you look like you're carrying something tonight. What is it?" For a moment, Keanu did not answer. His lips parted but then closed again as if the words were too sharp to speak. He took a deep breath, his chest rising slowly, and when he finally looked at Sandra, his eyes carried the kind of pain that only comes from a wound that never fully healed. "There are memories," he whispered. "Memories I have tried to bury, but they don't let me go. I never spoke about them, not even when people asked, but they live inside me every day. It's about my ex, and Sandra. It still hurts." The words cut through the air. Sandra's heart softened instantly. She knew Keanu as the man who gave kindness to strangers, the man who lived quietly despite the world shouting his name. But in this moment, she saw the man who carried scars too deep to hide. She reached out her hand, resting it gently near his. "You don't have to be alone in this," she whispered. Keanu closed his eyes. For a few seconds, the silence returned, but this time it was filled with emotion, the kind that pulled even the listener into its gravity. Then he began to speak, slowly, as if every word came from a place of resistance and pain. "I once thought love could heal everything," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I believed that no matter what we faced, if we held on to each other, we could survive anything. But life is not so simple. Love is not always enough. I shared my soul with her. I gave everything. And still it ended in a way I never imagined. It was not betrayal. It was not anger. It was something more painful, something I could never fight." Sandra's eyes searched his face, and her breath caught in her throat. She felt his struggle in every syllable, as if his story was not just his own, but something everyone who had ever loved and lost could understand. "What happened?" she asked softly. Keanu leaned back slightly, his gaze falling to the floor. "She left this world too soon," he whispered, his voice cracking. "And when she did, it felt like half of me went with her. I tried to keep living, but every corner of my life was filled with her shadow. Every song, every place, every moment reminded me of what I lost. I walked among people, but inside I was empty." The room grew heavier. Sandra could feel the truth wrapping around her heart like a storm. She had never seen him so vulnerable, never seen the quiet strength of Keanu turn into such open pain. He continued, his voice steady but heavy. "People saw me smile. They saw me work. They saw me act. But they never saw the nights I couldn't sleep, the mornings I woke up and wondered why I was still here. They never saw how I carried her memory like a weight on my chest, a weight I could not set down." Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. She was not just listening to a friend. She was witnessing a man unmask his soul. She reached for his hand, this time fully, her fingers gently curling around his. "Keanu," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "you are not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this in silence. You gave her love, and love like that does not die. It lives in you, and it makes you who you are. That kindness, that humility everyone admires. It comes from the heart you gave to her. And maybe, just maybe, sharing this will finally set you free." For the first time that night, Keanu looked up and met her eyes. Something shifted. His face was still heavy with pain, but in his gaze there was a flicker of relief, as if her words had broken through the wall he had built for years. The moment hung between them, powerful and unspoken. Outside, the night wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the silence that had lingered for so long. Inside, two friends sat hand in hand, and a story long hidden had finally found its way into the light. But little did they know, this was only the beginning. What Keanu had revealed was not the whole truth. Behind his words lay another layer of pain, one that would test not only his strength but also the bond he shared with Sandra, a truth that, once uncovered, would shock everyone. The night stretched on, but the air inside the room only grew heavier. Sandra could still feel the weight of Keanu's hand in hers, as if it was carrying not just his sorrow but years of silence that no one else had touched. His words from moments earlier still echoed between them, and though he had revealed much, Sandra sensed that what he shared was only a doorway into something even deeper, something far more painful. Keanu sat still, his eyes fixed on the dim light that flickered across the wooden table. It was as if he was fighting a storm within, one that pulled him between the past and the present. Sandra leaned forward gently, her voice soft but steady, determined to break through the silence once again. "Keanu," she whispered, "you don't have to hold anything back from me. I can see there's more you're not saying." His lips trembled as though the words wanted to escape, but his heart resisted. He rubbed his palms together slowly, his body tense, as though every muscle in him was bracing against the flood of memory that threatened to spill out. Finally, he sighed, his voice rough and low. "There's something I never told anyone. Not even the people closest to me. It's the part of the story that hurts the most. The part that changes everything. If I speak it now, I don't know if I'll be able to stop." Sandra's chest tightened. She could see the torment behind his eyes, but she also knew this was the moment he needed someone to stand with him. "Then don't stop," she said softly. "Let it out. I'm here, no matter what." Keanu looked at her, and for a second his expression was one of disbelief, as if he was asking silently whether she truly understood the darkness he was about to reveal. Then, slowly, he began to speak again, his voice carrying a heavy rhythm, like every word was carved out of grief. "When she left this world," he said, "people thought I grieved like any man who lost the love of his life. They thought I stayed quiet because that's how I cope. But the truth is I carried guilt, Sandra, guilt that still wakes me up at night. I ask myself every day if it was my fault." Sandra's eyes widened. "Your fault? Keanu, how could you even think that?" He shook his head, his hands tightening as though he was holding on to the memory itself. "Because the night before everything happened, she tried to tell me something. She wanted to talk, but I was so tired, so distracted with work, that I told her we'd talk later. I thought there would always be another tomorrow. I didn't know that was the last tomorrow I'd ever get with her." Sandra's heart broke at his words. She could feel the sharp edge of regret in his voice, cutting deeper than any wound on the body. Keanu's silence had never been just grief. It had been the silence of blame, of a man punishing himself for something beyond his control. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you couldn't have known." "No one could have known." But he shook his head again, more forcefully this time. "That's what everyone says. But inside me, I keep replaying that moment. I see her standing there waiting for me to listen, and I see myself walking away. And now, every time I think of her, I don't just remember the love. We had so much love, Sandra. But I remember the silence I gave her when she needed me the most, and that silence has haunted me more than her absence." Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. She squeezed his hand tighter, desperate to anchor him to the present. "You loved her, Keanu. Love is not erased by one missed moment. She knew your heart. She knew your kindness. She knew the way you gave yourself completely. You can't let one night define everything you shared." But Keanu's expression was unyielding, his eyes fixed in a haunted stare. "Do you know what hurts the most? It wasn't just her. It was what came after. I never told the world what I found when I opened the letter she left behind." Sandra froze. Her breath caught. A letter. The word itself carried mystery, weight, and unspoken truths. "A letter?" she asked, her voice nearly a whisper. Keanu nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yes, it was waiting for me the next morning. Her handwriting, her words, everything she wanted to say but never could. I've read it 1,000 times, Sandra, but every time I do, it feels like I am being torn apart all over again." Her heart raced. This was the moment she realized there was more than just grief and guilt. There was a secret, something so fragile that Keanu had buried it for years. "What did she write, Keanu?" Sandra asked gently. He looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, his voice breaking as he answered. She wrote that she knew her time was short. She had hidden her sickness from me because she didn't want me to suffer. She carried that pain alone, thinking she was protecting me, but instead it left me shattered. She wrote that she wanted me to keep living, to not let her departure chain me to the past. But Sandra, how could I do that when every line of that letter reminded me of what I never saw, what I never asked, what I failed to notice? Sandra's tears finally spilled, rolling silently down her cheeks. She felt his pain as though it was her own, and in that moment, she wished she could take it from him, if only to give him peace. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "She loved you so deeply that even in her last words she was protecting you. That's not your fault. It's the greatest proof of the love you shared. You didn't fail her. She chose to carry that alone because she believed in your strength. And the fact that you're still here, still standing, still kind despite all this pain, that means you honored her wish in ways you don't even see." Keanu finally broke. His shoulders trembled, his eyes filling with tears that had been locked away for years. He lowered his head into his hands, the silent sobs shaking his body. Sandra moved beside him, wrapping her arms gently around him, holding him as if her embrace could shield him from the ghosts of his past. For a long time, there were no words, just the sound of his quiet grief, the weight of his sorrow, and the warmth of her comfort. And then, as the tears slowed, as his breathing steadied, Keanu whispered one final truth, a truth that deepened the wound yet carried within it a spark of something greater. "Sandra," he said softly, "I never told anyone this, but the letter wasn't just for me. It mentioned you too." Sandra froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "Me?" she whispered in shock. Keanu nodded slowly, his voice trembling. "Yes, and what she wrote about you will change everything you thought you knew." The room fell silent once again. But this silence was different. It was the silence of suspense, of hearts beating faster, of a truth waiting to be revealed that could alter not only Keanu's pain, but the bond between him and Sandra forever. Outside, the night deepened, shadows thickening against the glass window. Inside, two souls sat on the edge of a revelation that would shake them both to the core. The silence after Keanu's last words was sharp, almost unbearable. Sandra's breath caught in her chest. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. She never expected her name to be part of this story, a story so painful and personal that it belonged to a place far beyond her reach. Yet here she was, drawn into it in a way she could not yet understand. "Me?" she repeated, her voice low, uncertain, trembling. Keanu's eyes lifted slowly. They were red, heavy from the tears he had just let escape. But behind them there was something else, something that looked like fear. He nodded once, his throat tightening before he spoke again. "Yes, Sandra. She wrote about you. And the words she left, they changed how I saw everything. For years I carried them inside me, afraid of what they would mean for you, afraid of what they would mean for us." Sandra leaned closer, every part of her aching to know, yet terrified of what she might hear. Her mind raced. Why would a woman she had never truly known, someone from Keanu's past, write her name in her final letter? What secret had been buried in ink all this time? "What did she say, Keanu?" Sandra whispered. "Please, tell me." Keanu's hand shook as he reached into his jacket pocket. From inside, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges worn and faded as if it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. He placed it gently on the table between them, but he did not let go. His fingers lingered on the paper, as if even after all these years, releasing it was almost impossible. "I never thought I'd let anyone else read this," he said softly. "But if there's one person who deserves to know, it's you." Sandra stared at the paper. It was more than just ink on paper. It was the voice of a woman gone too soon, the last fragments of her heart captured in words. She waited as Keanu slowly unfolded it, his hands trembling with each crease. Finally, the letter lay open. His eyes scanned it once more as though he was preparing himself. And then he began to read aloud. "Keanu," he read, his voice breaking with emotion, "I know you will carry my absence like a shadow, but I hope you also carry my love as your light. You were the greatest gift of my life, and even in leaving, I want you to keep living, to keep smiling, to keep giving kindness to the world." His voice trembled, but he forced himself to continue. "There is one more thing I must tell you. I know you will not be alone. I know that in your life, there is someone who has always understood you. Someone who has always carried a quiet love for you in ways even she does not admit to herself. Her name is Sandra. If one day the weight becomes too heavy, and if one day your heart seeks comfort, trust her. She will remind you of the strength you forget you have. She will help you heal." The words pierced the silence like thunder. Sandra's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her body froze, her mind spinning in disbelief. She stared at Keanu, her eyes wide with shock, her heart racing faster than it ever had before. She wrote that?" Sandra asked, her voice shaking. Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "Yes, she saw something before we ever did. She believed that somehow you would be the person who could carry me when I could no longer stand. And every time I read these words, I thought of you. I thought of us. But I never had the courage to say it." Tears filled Sandra's eyes. The air in the room felt thick, almost unbreathable. "Keanu, I don't know what to say. I never knew." He looked down at the letter again, his voice low but steady. "Neither did I. I didn't understand what she meant back then. But as the years passed, as I walked through pain and silence, I realized she was right. Sandra, every time I fell, you were there. Every time I couldn't speak, you listened. Every time I was drowning in my own silence, you pulled me back with nothing but your presence. Maybe she saw something we didn't. Maybe she knew before we did." Sandra's heart twisted. She thought back to the countless moments over the years. Quiet dinners, long conversations, the way they always seemed to find comfort in each other's company. Had she truly carried something for him all this time? Had she hidden feelings she didn't even recognize? But before she could speak, Keanu leaned closer, his voice softer, almost afraid. "There's more, Sandra. She didn't just write about you. She warned me too." Sandra blinked, startled. "Warned you? About what?" Keanu's eyes grew darker, his voice carrying the weight of another secret. "She wrote that love does not come without cost. She said that if I ignored her words, if I ran from them, I would hurt not only myself, but also the very person she trusted me to lean on. She warned me that silence would destroy me and destroy the bond I shared with you and Sandra. I think she was right. I've been silent for too long. I let fear keep me from telling you. And now, I don't know if I've already hurt you without even realizing it." Sandra's tears spilled freely now. She felt the depth of his confession like a tidal wave. The letter was not just a farewell. It was a bridge between past and present. A message from someone who had seen into their souls with clarity neither of them had dared to face. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Keanu, you haven't hurt me. You've only shown me the part of you no one else has seen. And if she trusted me to help you, then I won't let her down. I won't let you carry this alone anymore." Keanu's eyes filled with fresh tears. He reached across the table, his hand finding hers once again, but this time with more strength, more certainty. Their fingers intertwined, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. Yet even as their bond deepened, a shadow lingered. Keanu's words, the warning from the letter, carried with them a quiet sense of dread. Because while love and healing were within reach, so too was the risk of pain. And neither of them knew that the next twist in their journey would test not only the truth of the letter, but the strength of their hearts in ways they had never imagined. Outside, the wind howled against the night sky, carrying with it the weight of secrets still waiting to be revealed. Inside, two souls sat on the edge of something both terrifying and beautiful, knowing that whatever came next would change everything forever. The night felt endless, as if time itself had slowed to witness what was unfolding between them. The letter still lay open on the table, its fragile paper trembling slightly under the faint draft from the window. Sandra couldn't tear her eyes away from it. Those words, written years ago by a woman she had never met, had now tied her heart to Keanu's in a way she never thought possible. Yet even as warmth flickered between them, there was also unease. The warning that echoed in the letter, "Love does not come without cost," hung over them like a shadow that refused to fade. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his hand still holding Sandra's, as though afraid that if he let go, she would disappear with the silence. His voice was low but steady when he spoke again. For years, I thought maybe she was wrong. I thought if I kept her words locked away, if I hid them deep inside, then life would go on without stirring old wounds. But Sandra, I was wrong. The silence has cost me more than I ever imagined. It almost destroyed me, Sandra's brows furrowed. She had always admired his quiet strength, the way he carried himself with humility despite the storms he endured. But now she realized that his silence had not been strength at all. It had been survival. "Keanu," she whispered, "what did it cost you?" He turned his face away for a moment, as though ashamed, as though confessing the truth would strip him bare. When he looked back at her, his eyes were glistening with pain. "It cost me trust," he admitted. "Not just with others, but with myself. I stopped believing I deserved happiness. I turned down chances to let people in. I walked away from moments that could have healed me because I thought I was cursed to lose anyone I loved. I thought if I let silence cover it all, I would be safe. But Sandra, silence isn't safe. It's a cage." His words pierced through her heart. She could see the cracks in his soul, the places where he had locked himself away from the world. She tightened her grip on his hand, her voice firm but gentle. "Then break the cage, Keanu. You've carried this alone for too long. Let it go now. Let it go with me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their eyes locked, and the silence was no longer empty. It was full of possibility, full of something unspoken that had lived between them for years. But then, Keanu's voice lowered, trembling once more. "There's something else I never told you. Something connected to the letter. Something I feared would change the way you see me." Sandra's breath caught. "What is it?" Keanu hesitated, his fingers brushing over the edge of the letter as if drawing strength from it. "She didn't just write about you, Sandra. She wrote about a choice I would one day have to make, a choice that would decide whether I lived in the past or moved toward the future. And she said that choice would not only affect me, it would affect you too." Sandra's eyes widened, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "A choice?" she repeated softly. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. She wrote that the day would come when I would have to choose between holding on to her memory or letting myself open my heart again, and that if I chose wrong, I would lose not just my own chance at peace, but I would lose you too." The words sank deep into Sandra's soul. She stared at him, her mind racing, her heart pounding. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, as though the walls themselves were closing in with the weight of his confession. "Keanu," she said carefully, "what do you think she meant by losing me?" His eyes darkened, his voice trembling with honesty. "I think she meant that if I stayed trapped in silence, if I never let myself step forward, then you would eventually walk away. Not because you didn't care, but because you couldn't keep holding someone who refused to heal. And Sandra, I don't want to lose you. Not now. Not ever." Her heart twisted painfully. She had always been there for him, always willing to listen, to share quiet moments, to stand by his side in silence. But now, hearing him say it, she realized how fragile the thread between them had been all along. She leaned closer, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "Keanu, I'm not walking away. But you're right, you can't live like this forever. You can't keep your heart buried in shadows. You deserve to heal. And if she trusted me to be part of that, then I won't let her down." Keanu's hand shook as he placed it over hers, his gaze locked on her face. "You mean that?" he asked, his voice filled with vulnerability. "Yes," she whispered. "I mean it." For the first time, a faint smile flickered across his lips. It wasn't joy. It was relief, fragile and fleeting, but real. Yet before the moment could settle, a sudden knock echoed through the quiet room. Sharp, unexpected, startling. Both of them froze, their eyes darting to the door. The knock came again, louder this time. Sandra's heart skipped. "Who could that be?" she asked, her voice uneasy. Keanu's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But something tells me this night isn't done with us yet." The room, once heavy with memory, now filled with suspense. The past had already bled into the present, but now the future was knocking, literally. And neither of them knew whether opening that door would bring closure, or tear open wounds even deeper than before. The knock at the door echoed again, sharp and deliberate, breaking the fragile stillness that had just settled between them. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look, part fear, part confusion, and part unspoken understanding that whatever was on the other side of that door could not be ignored. Keanu rose slowly from his chair, his hand brushing against the edge of the table for balance. His movements were cautious, as if the air itself had grown heavy with warning. Sandra stood too, her body tense, her breath shallow. She could feel the pulse of suspense in her chest. "Stay here," Keanu whispered, though his own voice was unsteady. But Sandra shook her head firmly. "No, I'm not leaving you to face this alone." They walked together toward the door, each step slow, measured, as though the ground beneath them was uncertain. When Keanu finally reached the handle, his hand hovered for a moment, frozen. The knock did not come again, but the silence outside felt louder than any sound. He drew a deep breath, turned the handle, and opened the door. Standing there was an older woman, her face lined with years of sorrow, but her eyes carrying a quiet strength. She held a small box in her hands, worn and faded like something that had traveled through both time and pain. "Keanu Reeves?" she asked softly, her voice trembling yet steady enough to carry weight. Keanu's brow furrowed, surprise flashing across his face. "Yes, can I help you?" The woman's lips quivered. "My name is Elena. I was a close friend of her. The woman you loved." The air in the room shifted instantly. Sandra's breath caught, and Keanu's grip on the door tightened. "Elena?" Keanu repeated, as if dragging the name from the depths of memory. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I was with her in the final months. She asked me to wait until the right time to give you this." She lifted the small box slightly. "And I believe that time is now." Keanu's chest tightened. His eyes darted to the box, then back to the woman. "Why now?" he asked, his voice breaking with both suspicion and hope. Elena's gaze shifted toward Sandra and then back to him. "Because she said you would not be ready until the moment you finally spoke her truth aloud." "I don't know what that means, but I believe you know." Keanu's knees weakened. He steadied himself against the doorframe. Sandra stepped closer to his side, her hand brushing gently against his arm, grounding him in the present. "Come in," Sandra said softly, breaking the tension. Elena stepped inside, her footsteps quiet, her presence calm yet charged with something deeper. She set the box down on the table where the letter still lay open, the two artifacts of the past now side by side. Keanu stared at the box, his throat dry. "What's inside?" Elena's eyes softened. "You'll have to see for yourself." His hands trembled as he reached forward. The box was old, its wood worn smooth, the lock rusted but weak. With a hesitant tug, it opened. Inside lay a stack of photographs, some folded notes, and a small silver pendant that glimmered faintly under the lamplight. Keanu lifted the pendant first, his breath hitching. "This was hers," he whispered. Elena nodded. "She wore it every day. She told me it was her reminder of the life she wanted with you, even when her time was running out." Sandra leaned closer, her eyes glistening. "Keanu!" But before he could answer, his fingers brushed against one of the folded notes. His heart pounded as he opened it, revealing handwriting he recognized instantly. "Keanu," he read aloud, his voice shaking. "If you are reading this, then you have spoken the words you tried to bury. I asked Elena to wait because I knew you would not be ready until Sandra stood by your side. She is the key to your healing. Do not run from her. Do not let silence steal what could be the most beautiful chapter of your life." The room fell into stillness. Keanu's hands trembled, and tears streamed silently down his cheeks. Sandra covered her mouth, her own tears falling freely. The note continued. "I want you to know this. Love is not betrayal. Love is not forgetting. It is carrying the ones we've lost in our hearts while daring to live again. You were my greatest love, Keanu, but your story is not over. I see your future and I see Sandra in it. Trust her. Trust yourself." Keanu dropped the note onto the table, his body trembling as he collapsed into the chair. His head fell into his hands. Why now? He whispered. Why after all these years? Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Because she knew you, Keanu. She knew your silence, your fear, your heart. And she trusted that only when you faced it, only when you shared it with Sandra, would you be ready. Tonight. You finally were. Sandra moved closer, kneeling beside him, her hand finding his. Keanu, she wanted you to live. She wanted you to love again, and she trusted me. I don't know if I deserve that trust, but I know I won't let her down. I'll stand by you. He looked at her then, his eyes filled with anguish but also something new, a spark of hope, faint but undeniable. Yet even as hope flickered, fear rose again. What if I fail, Sandra? What if I can't let go of the past? What if I lose you the same way I lost her? Sandra held his gaze, her voice steady despite her tears. Then we face it together. Pain, fear, hope, all of it. You don't have to walk alone anymore, and I won't let you. For the first time in years, Keanu felt the weight of his silence begin to crack. And as Elena quietly stepped back, her presence fading into the background, the air in the room shifted. It was no longer just heavy with grief. It was alive with the possibility of healing, of love reborn not in betrayal but in honor of the past. But deep in Keanu's heart, he knew the hardest test was yet to come. Because healing was not a single moment, it was a journey. And that journey would demand more strength, more vulnerability, and more courage than he had ever given before. The box still sat open on the table, the pendant glimmering faintly beside the letter, the photographs and the notes that carried so much weight. The room felt sacred, as though time itself had paused to let Keanu, Sandra, and Elena breathe in the meaning of what had been revealed. Keanu's hands trembled as he traced the edges of the photographs. There were images of moments he had forgotten, smiles, laughter, days when life felt infinite. Each one was like a wound reopening, but also like a window showing him the beauty that had once been his. Sandra watched him closely, her heart aching for him. She wanted to take the pain away, to ease the burden that had pressed on him for years. But she knew this was his moment, a moment that could not be rushed or softened by words alone. Elena's voice was gentle when she finally spoke. She didn't want you to live in sorrow, Keanu. She wanted you to remember love as light, not as a chain. Keanu closed his eyes, holding the pendant tightly in his palm. All these years I thought remembering meant holding on to the pain. I thought if I let go of the pain, I would be letting go of her. But now, I see I've been wrong. Love doesn't vanish when we choose to heal. It stays, it lives inside us, and it shapes who we are. His voice broke, but in that break there was release. For the first time, he was not holding the pain as a prison. He was letting it flow out, letting it transform into something softer. Sandra's hand found his, her touch steady, grounding. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. You have me. You always have? He looked at her then, truly looked. The tears in his eyes reflected not just grief, but gratitude. You've been my anchor without even knowing it, Sandra. And now I see what she saw. You were always meant to be part of my healing, maybe even part of my future. Sandra's breath caught, her chest tightening with emotion. Keanu, she whispered, her voice trembling. If that's true, then I'll stand by you. I'll walk with you through every shadow until all that's left is light. For a long moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that was no longer heavy with sorrow but filled with connection, understanding, and the unspoken promise of something new. Elena quietly moved toward the door, her task complete. Before leaving, she turned back, her eyes soft with both sorrow and peace. She loved you both in her own way, and tonight, she gave you both a gift. Don't waste it. With that, she slipped into the night, leaving them alone once more. Keanu set the pendant gently on the table, beside the letter and the photographs. His eyes lingered on them, but for the first time, he didn't feel chained. He felt grateful. I'll never stop missing her, he said softly. But maybe missing her doesn't have to mean living in the dark. Sandra nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. She's part of you, Keanu, and she always will be, but so am I. and together we can carry both love and loss without letting it break us." He reached for her hand again, but this time it was not trembling. His fingers intertwined with hers, steady, strong, sure. In that moment, something shifted. It was not the end of grief, not the sudden erasure of pain, but the beginning of healing. The letter, the pendant, the photographs, they were no longer weights dragging him down. They were reminders that love was eternal, and that moving forward was not betrayal, but honor. The night outside had grown still, the wind quieting, as if the world itself had paused to witness this turning point. Inside, two souls sat together, bound by both past and present, ready to face a future shaped not by silence but by truth, by kindness, by resilience. Sandra rested her head gently against his shoulder, and Keanu let out a breath that sounded like release. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. "Thank you, Sandra," he whispered. She closed her eyes, her voice soft but certain. "You don't have to thank me. Just let me stay." And he did. The story that began with silence now ended with connection. A painful memory, once buried, had finally found its voice. And through that voice came healing hope, and a bond that would carry them forward into a future neither of them had expected, but both were ready to embrace.